Good day and welcome to the dining room table White House press briefing regarding infrastructure. Let's hear what the White House has to say.
As you all know, today we have Mayor Landrieu, Mitch Landrieu, Infrastructure Implementation Coordinator, who's here to talk about one of the president's favorite things, Infrastructure Week. In fact, he loves this week or this decade, right? He calls it Infrastructure Decade. So that's what the president has coined it to be. So, Mitch, the podium is yours.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Corinne, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I thought maybe what I'd do is make a couple of comments, and then if anybody has any questions, y'all okay with that? All right. All of you may remember, but on November 15th, 2021, just a short 18 months ago, President Biden signed into law the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, a $1.2 trillion once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure and competitiveness. We say once in a generation because it hasn't happened in our lifetimes, and quite frankly, it may not happen again in the near future. As you know, this is a critical part of the president's Investing in America agenda, which is growing our economy from the bottom up and the middle out. We're making historic investments and delivering real results for working families across the country. This investment is not only creating good paying jobs, but it's encouraging private investment, and it's creating new belief and confidence in the idea that when we come together, we can actually do really big things in America. While Infrastructure Week was a punchline under our predecessor, it is now a reality, and it is now, in fact, going to be our infrastructure decade. Next week actually is Infrastructure Week, but now the difference is we're in full progress. We're breaking ground, we're turning dirt, and we're getting it done. There is no way for us to get from work to home, to our kids' schools, to our mosque, our synagogue, our church, to our playgrounds, to keep the economy humming, to get goods from ships to shelves without good roads, bridges, airports, ports, and waterways. There's no way to keep our economy humming, to make sure that everybody in America has access to knowledge, to make sure that farmers have access to precision agriculture, or people that live in rural areas have access to telemedicine if we don't have access to high-speed internet, which is why this bill also makes sure that that happens everywhere in the United States of America. President and the Vice President think that everybody in America has a right to clean air and safe water, which is why there are billions of dollars to make sure that we get lead out of the pipes, to make sure that we clean up abandoned mine lands, to make sure that we clean up orphan well Superfund sites and brownfield sites, to make sure that the Great Lakes are cleaned up and the Everglades and the coastal parts of America. And then finally, to get ready for the existential crisis that is upon us now, the climate crisis, we all need to prepare for a clean energy economy. That is why this $1.2 trillion bill is so critically important to the people of America, and that is why it was on the top of the president's list. We're going to do this on time, on task, and on budget. We're actually getting it done. To date, we have announced over $220 billion in funding for over 32,000 projects, reaching over 4,500 communities in every state in the nation, all of the territories, and DC. And today we are launching a new map at build.gov to showcase that progress, not only for the 32,000 specific projects, but for the major projects, highlighting all the signature projects in all of the states, territories, and in DC. Now, that's a lot of projects and investments in a short period of time. So let me dig into some of the details and tell you what that really means. Under President Biden's leadership, we have begun repair on over 69,000 miles of roadway, over 4,600 bridges. We've invested in over 3,000 new clean transit buses and school buses for our kids. We have invested in hundreds of port projects, including 13 major port and waterway projects. We've begun construction on hundreds of airports, including 70 that are already getting terminal upgrades across the country and more. Now, these projects, as you must imagine and have heard the announcements, grow by the week. Just take a look at the work that's happening across the country as we speak. In fact, today we're breaking ground in New Haven, Connecticut on the Walk Bridge, which runs from New Haven to Mount Vernon, New York, a crucial connector on the Northeast Corridor for the Metro North Amtrak and freight lines. Also today, the Corps of Engineers is breaking ground on the final phase of a $2.9 billion flood resilience project in Fargo-Moorhead metropolitan area in North Dakota to better protect that major health, education, cultural, and commercial center from flooding. Next week, the First Lady will be doing Tribal Broadband Project kickoff in Alaska. We'll also be announcing new funding awards for FEMA resilience grants, which are much needed. And I will break ground next week a $1 billion series of locks along the Mississippi River in Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri with the Corps of Engineers, a critical project for our farmers and our agricultural community as we move goods up and down the mighty Mississippi River. Now, this is happening all across America from coast to coast and in the heartland and everywhere in between. All of you will recall, I hope with great fondness, that the president kicked off the new year at the Brent Spence Bridge on the Ohio-Kentucky border, where we're investing a total of $1.6 billion for that existing bridge. And then we're going to build a new one right next to it to relieve the congestion and improve travel time reliability on one of the most critical arteries of our nation's supply chain. And we're breaking ground on that project actually later this year. We're also seeing some early projects get started and actually get finished. Just a few weeks ago, I was in San Diego at the West Mission Bay Bridge to celebrate the replacement of a 70-year-old bridge spanning the San Diego River. That was the largest project in the city's history, and it's going to transform the day-to-day commute of the folks that live in that area. Now, as predicted by President Biden, our investments in infrastructure are motivating the private sector to manufacture and build things in America. We are in the midst of a made in America manufacturing boom all across this country, and we have the receipts. In fact, this administration's investments have now driven over $470 billion in private sector manufacturing and clean energy investments, which are creating good paying jobs that don't require a college degree. And you have been read into all of those things. In particular, there have been major new private sector announcements in electric vehicle charging, EV battery, rail, fiber optic, and cable manufacturing since this infrastructure was signed just 18 months ago. Now, moving forward, our progress on infrastructure goes hand in hand with our economy's trajectory. You see, the foundation of a strong economy is literally our country's infrastructure. Our infrastructure is, in fact, the cornerstone upon which all else rests. And as the president often says and reminds us, when we invest in America, when we invest in ourselves, we win. So Infrastructure Week is a punchline, no more. It is here. President Biden and Vice President Harris have delivered. Now, it's Employee Appreciation Week, and so I would be remiss if I did not just take a minute to thank all of the folks that have made this possible. The president has always said when we come together, we can do big things in America. So the president, the vice president, all of the cabinet members, all of the federal employees, we have 5,000 new of them who have been working on this project. The partnership with the mayors and the governors, the partnership with the business, the labor, the private sector, the faith-based community, and of course, Congress have made this possible. The president, the vice president, and the cabinet have made over 300 trips to talk about this across the country. And as the president often reminds us, this is what a one team, one fight mission looks like and why America can do big things when we come together. So 18 months in, we hit the ground running. We're now seeing real tangible progress. And now it's time for us to finish the job. Thank you all very much. I'll be happy to answer questions that you might have.
Mitch, can you give us a sense of how the debt ceiling debate and potential negative outcome will impact the infrastructure spending and the law? And can you also give us a sense of how red states are taking the money, and if anyone voting against it is saying no thanks?
Let me do this backwards. They're taking it fast, the red states, and nobody has returned a dollar. Everybody has been a ready and willing partner. And of course, as I said, these projects are in all 50 states. They are touching 4,500 communities. They're in the territories and they're in DC. On the debt limit, I'll make just a couple of comments. I know that y'all have spoken a lot about this, but as the president said, America is not a deadbeat nation. Avoiding default is a basic duty of Congress. And in fact, this is a manufactured crisis. And as the president said, and as I've said to many of you today, there are presidents investing in America. Agenda is working. Got to keep the progress going. 12.7 million jobs, 800,000 manufacturing jobs, which is the proof of the manufacturing boom that we have. 3.4% unemployment, a made in America manufacturing boom. And of course, as Moody said, and you all have all heard this and reported this, a default is going to cost us 800,000 jobs, push us further into recession, raise the cost of everything, including borrowing. And that really kind of threatens to do all of this major progress going forward. And my sense is that we have never been here before, at least at this particular point. Nobody wants to see it happen. The consequences are unpredictable, but it can't have anything but negative consequences on the work that we're trying to do.
Thank you for being here. If I can ask you about the debt ceiling conversations, not that you're privy to every one of these, but obviously you're privy to the process of trying to build around the country right now. How critical is the idea of permitting reform? And is that something the administration would be open to because you think it would make the job easier and something you should embrace going forward?
Well, they're not necessarily connected. As you know, when you have the incredible opportunity that we have in front of us, 12.7 million jobs, a 3.4% unemployment rate. Any president in history would trade President Biden's numbers right now because nobody's come close to them. That's in 2 years what most presidents have not been able to do in 4 years. So when you're trying to build new things and you're trying to build things fast, you got two major issues that you're working through. One of them is permitting and one of them is workforce. And of course, from the beginning, we have been working on getting things built faster and permitting things faster. As you know, Senator Manchin had a bill. That bill failed. That bill has now been reintroduced. The president continues to support that bill. On the executive branch side, we're doing everything we can to speed up how we actually greenlight projects. We want to dedupe, series because things used to go in sequential order. We want to make sure that we have the right data. We want to make sure that we're doing the right community involvement, because if you don't, that has a higher risk of litigation. And then finally, we want to make it faster to go on clean energy. All of those things are in play, and we continue to work.
Helps, it doesn't hurt in your view.
It does, but they're not necessarily connected. They were bills. Absolutely, 100%. It's better. We got to go faster. We got to do better, and we got to do more.
Are there any contingency plans being put into place when it comes to these infrastructure projects in the event that there is a default? And then secondly, I know that you are talking to local officials across the country. You are a former mayor yourself. Have you had any conversations with mayors expressing concerns about the lifting of Title 42 and the impacts that's having in their communities?
Well, the secretary was here yesterday on Title 42, and I'm going to let him address that, and Corinne, as we go forward. And no, I haven't had any conversations with them about that. But as it relates to contingency plans, let's just be kind of clear about this. A lot of the money that was in the infrastructure bill was forward loaded and is not going to necessarily have an impact on specific projects, irrespective of what happens in Congress, unless Congress repeals the bill and there's no legislation to do that. However, remember, these things don't exist in isolation. So we have hired lots of new employees. If those employees have to stop working, that's a challenge. You have seen what are the potential cuts. A 22% cut is going to impact what the federal workforce can do or cannot do. If you have a default and it slows the economy down, it's going to have a natural impact on everything that we're doing in the country, in the public and the private sector. But the specific technical answer is a lot of the bipartisan infrastructure law funding was preloaded and is not at this moment in play on the kind of discussions that happen on the Hill.
All right, two more. Go ahead, James.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, Mayor. Secretary Buttigieg has appeared where you're standing now and discussed how federal funds will be used to redesign urban areas that are assessed to contain infrastructure that was racist in its original design and its original execution. Are you collaborating with him on that effort? Are any of the infrastructure funds you're talking about being used for that purpose?
Well, as you know, equity is really important to the President of the United States for the very simple reason that he thinks that unless we go forward together, it's hard to go forward at all. That's the first thing to remember. And this administration believes that diversity is a great strength, not a weakness, and that if we're going to do all of this stuff, it's not just a matter of justice, it's a matter of numbers as well. That's the first. The second part of it is this. There are, in fact, highways, waterways, roadways. If you ask anybody in the African-American community or in communities of color, where do you live? They will often say, I live on the other side of, and it's usually a railroad track or water or a highway that split historic neighborhoods. There is, in fact, $4 billion, both in the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, to fund a program that's called Reconnecting Communities. I was actually in Fort Lauderdale the other day looking at some of the damage from the flood that they had, and the mayor was showing me a railroad track that had separated two areas. Now, they have an option. They could run a highway across it, or they can build a tunnel underneath it to reconnect the neighborhoods. This administration thinks that historically underrepresented neighborhoods that have been split apart, families split apart, businesses split apart, they can be reconnected to actually heal the community and create greater economic opportunity is actually a very thoughtful thing to do. And so we're working on that, not only with roads and bridges, but with clean air and clean water, which is what Lead Pipe's about, clean air and clean buses. So the kids shouldn't be getting off of school buses, drinking that exhaust like Linus, having that dust thing following behind him. All of those things are a part of the work that we're trying to do. in the infrastructure law.
Where the urban redesign piece of it is concerned, is it you or Secretary Buttigieg who enjoys final disposition over the allocation of those funds or the selection of the projects, et cetera?
As the infrastructure coordinator, I don't have final disposition over anything. My job is to herd cats. And so as a consequence, what we've done is we've had 17 different cabinet level meetings working with each of the cabinet secretaries so they can coordinate their activity. I've asked each of the governors in the country on behalf of the president to appoint an infrastructure coordinator to help coordinate with us. And then I've talked to 1,700 mayors across the country. So all of our teams can work, but all of the cabinet secretaries are the ones that are ultimately responsible for making the final decision on all the grant programs that come to them. And then, of course, the other half of this bill is formula funding, which goes out by operation of law.
Last question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor, for being here. I have a question about the power plants and the administration's clean energy goals. Yesterday, about the EPA's new power plant regulations, U.S. Chamber of Commerce raised concerns about the carbon reduction goals, stating that they go too far too fast. They said that these rules could threaten power supply and raise energy prices, harming the entire economy. How do you make sure how will the Biden administration convince the business community that your proposal is viable and not harm the economy?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I'm gonna send you to Administrator Reagan to answer the details of that question. But as a general rule for all of this, remember we're doing three things: we're building the team, we're getting the money out of the door, and then we're trying to tell the story. Everything requires a balance. It's all about timing. It's all about focus. With everything that we do, somebody will say you're going too fast. Somebody will say you're going too slow. Our job is to try to get it just right and to make sure that this economic boom that we're having is steady and stable, and that we continue to grow. As I will end where I finished, the president said this is the backbone, this is the cornerstone of the economy. He has created 12.7 million jobs. We have 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 3.4%. We have momentum now, and we ought not do anything or take any action that slows us down. Thank you all so much.